Hi and welcome to the Homeopathy Health Show. I'm Atik Ahmad-Bhatti, a fourth generation homeopath with over 25 years of professional experience and practice in this field of healing. The Homeopathy Health Show is the online voice of homeopathy around the world, promoting and raising awareness of this truly unique system of healing, which is suitable for all ages, young and old. Every week I invite guests from the world of homeopathy to come and share their experiences, their work, offer insights, and essentially talk all things homeopathy. Why not visit www.liketreatslike.co.uk and click on the radio and podcast button to listen to the latest episodes. So let's begin today's show here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. Hi and welcome to another episode of the Homeopathy Health Show here on the UK Health Radio Network, and of course, and as always, I'm your host, Atik Ahmad-Bhatti. Now, I do hope you've had a wonderfully splendid week indeed, and of course, I always hope and pray that you are in the best of health and certainly may it remain that way. Now, my guest on today's episode of the Homeopathy Health Show is the amazing Rachel Roberts, who is the Chief Executive of the Homeopathy Research Institute, which is a UK-based charity that is dedicated to promoting high-quality research in homeopathy around the world. Now, interestingly enough, the charity was founded by physicist Dr Alexander Tournier and is now very much a leading research authority on homeopathic research, answering the questions of the efficacy of homeopathy, its viability in healthcare, and much, much more. Rachel Roberts has worked at the Institute since 2010 and is a graduate with a first-class honours degree in biological sciences, specialising in physiology. Rachel Roberts, a virtual hug. Welcome to the Homeopathy Health Podcast. Absolutely delighted that you're on.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, and thank you for the hug.
I can't control my excitement, you know. I might have to take some homeopathic remedies to calm my system down during this podcast. So Rachel, I really wanted to ask you, you have a very interesting background, of course, with biological sciences. So the question which you may have been asked many, many times is, of course, how did that lead to homeopathy? What was that journey? Because I know you studied at the School of Homeopathy in the 90s.
Yes.
And what sort of led you to that? What led you towards homeopathy?
Yeah,
I mean,
it was a massive U-turn, I have to admit. So as my family will remember, because I think it was a shock to a lot of people at the time, but I was absolutely a scientist first, absolutely passionate about biology. I'm still in awe of the human body, to be honest. It's still my first love. And I was planning to go into neuroscience research. So I was in the final year of my degree, and I just decided that was where I wanted to specialize. And at the time, I was doing a small amount of research on why children go deaf after meningitis, that kind of thing, really loving it, and was going to go on to do my PhD and just stay with that. And at that time, I was what you would now call a skeptic. That word hadn't really been invented back then. And what I mean by that is I used to, if homeopathy was ever mentioned, I just really poo-pooed it and said, what a load of rubbish, and don't these people understand science, and they're idiots, and it should be banned, and they're quacks, and all the awful things that some people say. And what's shocking to me now is that I said it when I knew absolutely nothing about homeopathy. Nothing. All I'd seen is a few headlines in the Daily Mail or whatever. That was my full knowledge of the subject. And yet I spoke with this kind of dismissive authority. Then several things happened close together that just started to shift me a little bit. And the first bit I remember was being in that lab and the lab assistant bringing a newspaper in, probably the Daily Mail again, with a headline, Queen takes arsenic, you know, because she'd taken arsenicum and all this sort of stuff. But from that, while I was laughing at it, I did look enough to see that it started talking in this article about the fact that there were homeopathic hospitals in the UK. I mean, bricks and mortar buildings full of real doctors treating people with homeopathy. That blew me away. Then I thought about the royal family. Some of the richest people on the planet will, of course, have the best doctors, but they're choosing this medicine and have done for generation after generation after generation. Not one member, the whole family. I was like, okay, that's a bit weird also. And also around the same time, I was seeing the limitations of conventional medicine. And that was a bit of a loss of faith for me in medicine, which I adored. I just saw family members suffering. As it happened, my dad died of cancer, non-Hodgkin's, when I was 16. These are the ultimate limitations that I was seeing. So I was just starting to think, okay, it's not as straightforward as I thought. And then there was a famous dinner party in my family, because it was a turning point for me, where somebody I've known from birth told me this story about being cured of a chronic condition with a single pill by a homeopath. And I just couldn't get my head around it. And I thought, she's not stupid. She's not lying. I know her. She didn't even want to do it. She did it to keep her daughter quiet. She only went to see the homeopath because she was kind of bullied into it and all that. And I just went once to shut her up. And this one pill worked. And it was all these little things, and I just got a bit intrigued. So I went to a bookshop in Birmingham, went to the new section I'd never been to before on New Age medicine or whatever it was called in the 90s, and looked for H for homeopathy and picked up this book and just read it straight through. And it was written by a German doctor. And it was just so straightforward, page after page of, this is how the remedies are made. This is how you use them. Here's case examples. I treated this person with this, and that's what happened. And it was so normal by this German doctor. And that blew my mind. It's like, hang on, this doesn't sound wacky suddenly. This just sounds like Latin names of things I don't know. But apart from that, this is normal medicine. And the turning point, sort of cumulatively from these little nudges, if you like, was I suddenly went, and I remember I was sitting in my car. I just bought it and read it in my car, was what if? What if they're right? What if I'm wrong? What if all these doctors and all these patients aren't idiots and they actually know what they're doing and it works? It sounds like they're describing something that allegedly is incredibly safe, incredibly effective, can treat things where conventional medicine has failed. I've just got to find out. And that was what it took. Me being me, I don't do things by half. So that it was, right, okay, now I'm interested. Forget the neuroscience. I can always go back to that if I want. Let's see what this homeopathy is. So I signed up for the 3-year full-time course to find out what it was all about. And it went from there.
Wow, what an amazing journey. But also, these stories always fascinate me because so many homeopaths have had similar examples where someone has taken homeopathy or someone within the family and they've seen that transformation.
Yeah.
But it's such a strange phenomena, isn't it? Because you quite rightly say, your background was very much, not interested, very skeptical perhaps. And from there to have that turning point, but it doesn't happen immediately.
Exactly. It's step by step by step. Yeah. And then it was years, of course. Then it was, well, maybe it can do little things, but not serious things. And maybe it could, I had all these, I kept putting boundaries and it kept smashing through everyone I put up, but over time. And for me, I'm very clear with myself that I don't exaggerate how fast this shift was, because I actually ended up having to see it work in animals. I had to see it work in a cat. That was really the next stage for me, because I'm still going, maybe the pills do something, but it's mostly placebo from these brilliant therapeutic consultations they do. It's probably that. I saw it work in a cat, with a deep-seated eye infection the vets couldn't cure, and one pill of Argentum nitricum cured it for life. I'm like, that shouldn't happen. That's weird, So I had to see that. Then I had to see it work in my own patients. I needed to see it work in children who didn't know what they were given. I had to see, what I mean? For me personally, it had to be no possibility of placebo here before I was really, really going to be convinced. Reluctantly.
It's interesting you say, because Pat Ahern I was talking to him just really very recently, and we were talking about placebo, and he was talking about his dairy cows and his soil and his crops.
Yeah.
Come on, this is how far-reaching homeopathy is. So that idea of placebo is just it's not there. I don't think it's valid anymore. And really, in fact, sometimes I do get people who are so, by hook and by crook, whatever you say, they're not going to be convinced. So I say to them, my answer to that usually is, okay, well, if it is placebo, you should be over the moon, because there's like nearly 500 million people are getting better just by that,
Exactly. I've had that kind of discussion with the Department of Health years ago in the UK when I was doing some political work here, that they were saying, oh, well, we can't accept this data because it's observational data. You have these studies done in the UK hospitals where one of the studies was amazing. It followed 6,500 consecutive patients over 6 years at the Bristol Homeopathic Hospital, every patient, and just did a very simple patient reported outcome measure, very standard. And 70% of the patients said they had a health improvement from homeopathy, and 50% said major health improvement. Now, 70% or 50%, some people say, oh, that's not very high. You have to bear in mind, you only got sent to the homeopathic hospital in the UK if everything else had failed. So these were patients who could not be helped by conventional medicine. Dr. Liz Thompson, who did that study, had a wonderful phrase for this. I don't know if you've heard it. Teeth patients tried everything else, tried homeopathy. So in those patients, to get that kind of results, I remember saying to this guy, why would you actually care in this moment of this discussion whether that was placebo or not?
Yeah.
If we can get all those patients better, you're saying just by talking to them, you should want this. As it happens, other data tells me it isn't placebo, but that is actually a separate argument.
Fascinating, isn't it? It really is. And it just goes to the testament of homeopathy that, and I'm sure you've said the same, that sometimes, again, people are they just don't want to know. There's very few, I have to say. But I always say, well, listen, one of the best live clinical trials on the planet is the fact that 500 to 600 million people are using homeopathy every day or day in, day out, or as part of their lives. I said, that's a live clinical trial for you. Go and ask them.
That's it. What I do say to people, if they're really against, is first of all, I do say, why? Where have you got that from? It's interesting. And when they do say, well, it's obvious it can't work, it's obvious it's impossible, I say, well, I would say it's not obvious if I'm telling you, I know you might not know me very well, but I am a scientist. All the doctors and the scientists and the professors that I work with every day have been studying this for decades. And they're the ones saying this isn't placebo. So could you just even possibly consider that means something, that's interesting, because you're coming in a place of saying it can't work, but you don't actually know that much from what I'm gathering, And I have, when it's got a little bit tense with some people, sometimes taxi cab drivers, you do say, well, have you read the clinical research? Have you read the laboratory research? Have you seen the experiments in plants? Have you met a homeopath? Have you tried it? Have you read a book on it? Where are you getting this from? And of course, every single time it's, actually, no.
Yeah.
And I just start telling them stuff. And usually by the time I get out of the cab at the other end, they're a little bit more open-minded and hopefully going to the HRI website and Googling homeopathy research.
It's fascinating conversations. And again, it's so true, isn't it, that sometimes people are very quick to shun something when they know nothing about it. Yeah. Reading something in a newspaper, I mean, it's the old phrase, isn't it? Don't believe everything you read, or online even now, isn't it? Don't believe everything you read in the papers. But it's amazing, isn't it? The power of words as well, though. I know we're going to go off on a slight tangent, but you see an article in a paper, but nobody questions it. And yet there's certainly the next generation is questioning a lot of things, as we know. And I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
And I've always been brought up, I'm sure, same as yourself, that question things.
Yes.
Do they make sense? Are they logical? Are they methodical? Are they thought through? And then where is the background?
I totally agree with you. And I think it's also, I feel quite passionately about reclaiming the word skeptic and skeptical, because skepticism is utterly healthy. I am still incredibly skeptical of anything new. I question it. And I believe that's from scientific training, and it's correct. I don't call the people who attack homeopathy skeptics myself. I call them anti-homeopathy campaigners or anti-homeopathy lobbyists, if they are actually lobbying, which a lot of them do, because that's who they are. They're not skeptics. And I know they've appropriated that word deliberately because it's good strategy. But I think I'd like it back, please. It's not accurate.
Yeah, I think that's wise words from you. For everybody else listening, it is so important to question things, because it's actually a means of progress and learning and improvement. And
it's the only way anything develops. And you never want anything to stagnate. I think we are so lucky as a sector that we've kind of inherited this 200 years plus of common experience, going back to the early medical doctors who tried all this out originally and passed everything on. And then I feel like I'm moving on. I'm 50, just turned 52. I have to think about it. I feel like it's another generation behind. You try to pass on everything you've learned, but we have to be developing it as well. We have to be moving forward, not just passing on old knowledge. So this is why I love shared experience from practitioners and patients and formal research. Like, to me, it's all important. That's truly evidence-based. It's not just clinical trials. It's putting all of this data together.
We're so fortunate that we have someone of your skill set and caliber and zeal, to be taking this forward and to be steering this ship. I think it's so incredibly important, especially now, which does take me on to the second point, which is we've seen recently a shift over the recent years as far as healthcare is concerned, and a great many, should I say, people are now not just questioning healthcare, but also questioning what else is there.
Yes.
Because we've all been brought up in a certain way, in a certain system. And those questions are arising, which again, is such a good thing for progression, right? And just to understand other things. And homeopathy, of course, being the second largest system of medicine outside conventional medicine in the world, is one of the go-tos. And people are asking those questions. Well, what is it? And certainly over the last several years, I've had so many people come up to me and said, and these are the same who would originally not be interested at all, but now they're saying, okay, look, we don't know, but just tell us a bit more about it.
Fantastic.
And then we'll have a look ourselves. That's so good, isn't it? That's
absolutely
so
right.
good.
And I've seen that exact same shift over the last few years, that I think everybody's been through an incredibly tough time. And it made people perhaps think about health in a different way. And for some people, that means they've just got a bit more interested, first of all, in research. Perhaps they've never been interested in scientific research before. Oh, sorry, I have a flashing light. 1 second, it's going to drive me a bit bonkers. I'm going to turn it off.
No problem.
I don't know if that's a storm that's raging or whether a bulb's going.
That was what you call I might leave that in, That's what you call a light bulb moment.
Light bulb moment, exactly. I've affected the light over there. So, yeah, I think for a lot of people, they're thinking about their health in new ways. And also sort of suddenly science was in the media, right? In a whole new way. And there's trials coming out or not, and they mean this or they don't. And there's politics and everything. So what I found is that more recently, people are hearing me in a different way. So there's people who've been around me all the 25 years I've been in this, but particularly, let's say, the last 12 or so years where I've been right at the forefront of the debate and engaging with the political side of it, saying, Rachel, I know you believe this, but surely if it worked, we'd all use it. Surely it's pretty simple. If you have a good trial, it will be published and it will make it into the news. And I'm sorry, but, I don't understand this. Now they get it a lot more. Now they realize that science and politics and the media are all entangled in a way which is, let's say, not ideal. It's very complicated. Vested interest is a massive thing. And it just isn't as simple as, if this trial is good and it shows it works, we'll all do it. It just isn't that simple. And they get that now. And they're kind of talking to me more now, saying, now I see what you've been saying for years. If I see that homeopathy is controversial, I start from there. I get that it's not easy for you necessarily to get the coverage that you really deserve. So that's been a real shift for me, and people just wanting to take control of their own health and going, oh, is there something else I could be doing? I love that more open mind.
It's so needed, isn't it? And we're quite fortunate with the next generation. I sound like someone from Star Trek, but the next generation of the youth, the leaders, the future leaders, are questioning these things, and it's so important. And in fact, when they question, they're so open-minded already. And it just makes it a lot easier because they understand where homeopathy is coming from. They understand that backstory, and 200 odd years later, they get it. They honestly do. They think, well, hang on, this is actually this makes sense to me because we're talking mind, body, spirit, mind, we're talking holistically. We're talking about minimum doses, and they do get it. Whereas our generation certainly has gone through that phase of, I don't know, it's all Harry Potter stuff,
I think you're absolutely right that there's been a massive shift from the early 90s, mid 90s, when I was graduating from university, to now, in the sense that, yes, on the one hand, homeopathy is progressing in what we know and what we can demonstrate through with cutting edge scientific techniques. However, more important to me is that the outside world is coming closer to us. That's the shift I've been watching and loving to see, because it does make me laugh sometimes. You know how they now say, conventional medics are saying we want more personalized medicine. We want to support the immune system rather than attacking it. We want to give minimum interventions. We want to reduce drug use. And they're at the same time, we're kind of going, hello, over here, kind of what we've been doing the whole time.
200 years.
Exactly. But my favorite is when I read something about this new area called psychoneuroimmunology, and I did burst out laughing. I'm like, psychoneuroimmunology, because we know that it is all connected. That is just mind-body medicine. It is just holism. Thank God they got there in the end. But you know what I mean? There's this slight frustration, but it means we're meeting in the middle. So now if you've got medical students being brought up in an era of psychoneuroimmunology where they are at least taught about how everything you think and what goes on in your brain affects your nervous system, which affects your immune system, which affects everything, and so on, it's not such a clash of paradigms when they hear about anything else that's holistic. It at least fits into their existing way of thinking. And I think that's a massive step forward.
It's interesting you mentioned this because there's been, you must have heard of German New Medicine and Dr. Hammer and the work that he did.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, where this is heading and where it's heading to. And it makes me laugh because I'm thinking, well, 200 years ago, the German physician who loved to serve humanity, was really compassionate, said these are the remedies for mental health complaints or anyone suffering from an emotional imbalance. 200 years later, it's the same remedies, and they're working amazingly well, and they've started to shine because this is the age of, sadly, emotional upsets and disturbances where it's just too much for everybody.
You've hit on another key point that really makes me kind of frustrated and laugh at the same time, because I've heard people criticize homeopathy to me saying, how can you possibly stand up for this? It's the same old stuff from 200 years ago. It's totally out of date. And I say, don't you get it? It's the opposite for me. Another moment where I shifted was at university. I remember, you had to buy those really expensive big textbooks back in the day. They probably don't have to now, but you did then. And it was a lot of money. These were things you could prop doors open with,
Yeah.
And one of them was on cell biology. And I remember the tutor saying, I said, can I get this secondhand one? I said, oh, no, you'll need a new edition because the new edition, there's going to be so many changes in it. This is out of date. And it was a moment for me where I said, pardon, this one's only a few years old. You're telling me this book contains incorrect information. And something went for me in my head. I was like, hang on. So the new edition I'm about to spend £40 on in the 90s, how much of that is going to be wrong? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was a moment of, yes, I know science constantly develops, but it was, what am I learning today that's wrong? It was something, and then I discovered when I got into homeopathy, and I realized that, yes, you pick up a book from, 1905 by Clark or something, and there's bits in it that make you smile because they're describing life at the time. But the actual medical information is as relevant today as it was then. And you said the same remedies, the same stuff. And the fact that you don't need to throw your books away every few years because they're wrong, for me, was a massive upside for homeopathy. It felt like standing on concrete instead of standing on quicksand.
It's amazing, isn't it? You're so right there, because those books have stood the test of time. Absolutely. Literally. And everything that's being done on homeopathy today, as far as remedies and analysis, it's still the same remedies. It's still the same signature of healing. Arsenicum is still arsenicum. Nux vomica is still nux vomica. Oromet is still oromet, right?
It's amazing.
It's just we've obviously made it more organized.
We've fleshed it out, or we've solidified it all at the same time, haven't we? We've kind of expanded it and made it more solid, which I love.
It's so exciting. Rachel, that moves us on to the Homeopathy Research Institute. So I do know that there are a number of studies that the Institute is involved with, but I wanted to ask you something. In an interview, and this is available, by the way, for anyone interested, it's a wonderful interview with Rachel Roberts, and it's available at the HRI website. So just type in Homeopathy Research Institute, just Google that, and it will come up. Someone asked the question about the 3 most important quality characteristics for good research. And you have such a wonderful reply. I love it. And we were talking about this just before the recording. You said, I always look for what I think of as research without compromise. That is, studies which ask the right question, use the highest quality conventional scientific techniques, and do not interfere or compromise with anything else or the care given to patients. So it's so important, isn't it, to when HRI are doing research, to have parameters, isn't it, and benchmarks to be able to then have efficient results, and the research that's being conducted, I must say, is incredible. I mean, it's a wealth, isn't it, of knowledge and a wealth of information. But can you elaborate just a bit more on that?
Yeah, so to give example that comes to mind immediately, we were really pleased to be able to fund a trial done by Petter Viksveen. I don't know if you've come across him, a fabulous homeopath and researcher from Norway. And he did a paper that was published in 2017. He conducted a pragmatic randomized controlled trial. So I don't know if you're aware of these, but they're a relatively new technique where you can have the rigor of a randomized controlled trial. As soon as you randomize, this means you can start talking about cause and effect. So that's the crucial thing. You are controlling conditions, so it's getting slightly artificial, but with a pragmatic RCT, you're as close to real world conditions as possible. So it's this beautiful blend of rigor and real life. So that meant that in his study, he took 450 people. They were adults suffering from self-reported depression, obviously a very important topic. And with these 450 patients, they were randomized into usual care, by which we just mean conventional medicine, or usual care plus treatment by a homeopath. So this is really real world, right? Because this is what happens, certainly in the UK. You're always still seeing your doctor, but you might choose to go and see a homeopath. And it was deliberately then measuring the full impact of the homeopathy, the consultation and the medicine, just what happens, the difference, do you go to a homeopath or not? And he did it with the latest techniques, which is what we're all about. So he used a very well validated way of measuring the outcome. It was the patient health questionnaire. So this is what you do for depression studies on conventional medicine. And he looked at the patients before and after 6 months of treatment and found what you call a moderate clinical effect from the homeopathy. And a moderate effect is really good. That's a strong result in clinical research. And crucially for me, he was able to confirm that that improvement in the patients who were treated with homeopathy was sustained at 12 months. So that's another thing we know is important, right? It doesn't matter if you get better than relapse again. The treatment that was given was effective longer term. So that for me is really research without compromise, which is why it was great for us to be involved with that.
It's, it just made me think that what really differentiates, because we can say homeopathic medicines, I mean, around the world, I know in the UK it's remedies, but certainly in places like India, they're medicines, they're homeopathic medicines, and you qualify, you have an MD, and then in India, for example, you have an MD Home. And so a proper qualified medical doctor specializing in homeopathy. But it's interesting, isn't it, that you mentioned about these trials, and the fact that what makes homeopathy so unique is the fact it's that relationship, isn't it, with the practitioner and the patient. And you mentioned some examples, and right up to this day, this is the case where a single dose can bring about a revolutionary change in somebody. And that's so important to know, that it's not just one size fits all. It's tailored, it's individualized, it's personalized, it's everything that you want, plus more. Because at the end of it, you actually make a friend, right? Homeopaths and patients become best buddies sometimes, I've seen that.
I think it's a really good point that it's important for anyone who's new to the topic to understand that there's two very distinct types of homeopathy. So what we're talking about here is what we might call gold standard care. It's like going to see your doctor, because it's somebody who's going to take on your case one-to-one, find a personalized prescription for you, and also support you through your treatment. And that's where this strong relationship can develop, because you really do, it sounds a bit cliche to say you go on a journey with your patients, but you really do, because you have to really understand them to get the right remedy, and then you have to sort of carry them through the process. That's how I see it. At the same time, I do sometimes remind people about over-the-counter remedies. Like, it can just be a pill. It can just be, if you've got sinusitis or something, there are some brilliant combinations out there, especially in Europe. A lot of homeopathy is like this. You walk into the pharmacy, you've got sinusitis, you pick up a pill, you take it, the odds are it'll work for you. Do you know what I mean? So to me, that is, again, just like conventional medicine, that we know that you'd walk into a pharmacy and there's rows and rows of shelves of medicines that you will try. And it will say something like, if this doesn't help you in so many days, please see your doctor. And I had mixed feelings about over-the-counter homeopathy when I was new, because you get a bit purist. You know, you think, oh, you have to have personalized treatment and everything. I did a U-turn on that one when I failed to be able to treat my own travel sickness. I'd had travel sickness my whole life, and none of the remedies worked for me. I was like, what's going on? And out of desperation, one day on the way, I was going on holiday, I was at the airport, I was in Boots, the chemist, you know, and I saw Travella by Nelson's. And out of desperation, I thought, well, just try it. It was brilliant. Totally fantastic. Changed my life. So I never traveled anywhere without that for the next 15, 20 years. And if people were suffering on holiday, I'd just give them some. And if it worked for them, they started asking questions about homeopathy. So I find it a brilliant gateway drug, I should say.
You're absolutely right, honestly, because I think those, certainly for these acute type episodes, the combinations work wonderfully well.
I remember trying to explain to somebody that I still understand why some people, you know, think it's a bad idea. Where they're coming from is, what if a patient goes into a member of the public goes into a pharmacy, picks up one of these things and it doesn't work? Because as it happens, there's someone who needs a more bespoke prescription. That's fine. So I think all we need is a bit of education around this. I would even love one day for it to say on the labels, if this doesn't work for you in, you know, a good time, please consult a professional homeopath, because that's what we really mean, right? Because you're just someone who happens to be a bit more unusual and you need a different remedy. Doesn't mean homeopathy doesn't work.
Now, you travel the world with your anti-sickness remedies.
Yes.
I had to bring that in. Yeah. So how many bottles of that do you have, by the way?
Actually, I'm terrible because, you know, I have tubs of this now. I've had it made up by Nelson for me. And I have little tubs that I keep in different bags so I can never be without it.
You can imagine at customs what that would be like. Can we check your bags?
Well, I did actually. I took a year off when I was 31. I took a very late gap year at 31. And by which time I was, you know, experienced homeopath. I was going around the world for a year. Can you imagine the kit I put together for 1 year for the whole planet? You know, what could happen to me in a year? And I thought I'd get stopped at all these airports. And I didn't in LA. I didn't in all these places. I thought they're going to hate this. I got stopped trying to go into Fiji. And I was pulled across and my partner was put in a separate room and it was, what is this? What is that? This is cocaine, isn't it? I went, no, really not cocaine. You know, and they made me pull out these vials and tell them what they were. So they got a crash course in materia medica because I was pulling them out one at a time. And then they made me take them. I was like, okay, you really want me to? So I took about 10 before I said, if they believe me and let me go. But it did make me laugh. Of all the places in the world they got excited about, it was Fiji.
You should have said, why don't you take it as well and see what happens?
I was tempted. I just said, I've had one. Do you want one? And then they went, oh.
It's funny, isn't it, what sweet globules can do?
Absolutely.
Rachel, do share the work that the HRI is currently involved with. I mean, I know I know we just went off tangent actually, but I was saying you fly around the world because you're teaching and you're involved with so many other factors as far as HRI is concerned, and presenting at seminars and events globally about the work that HRI does and how it integrates with other organizations as well. But what's going on at the moment over the last year? What have you been involved with?
So HRI is a charity registered in the UK. So we have a very clear remit that's defined from the beginning and which we of course stick to every year, which is that we are about two things. We're about promoting new high quality research. And I mean promoting, not talking about it. I mean everything to do with it, facilitating it, generating it, encouraging it, and talking about it. And then, of course, communications. And the communications at the beginning was pretty simple. It's just like, okay, here's a good news study. Think you want to know about it. Over the years, that's the bit that has got bigger and bigger and more important because it's become actually often challenging misinformation. That's become the more active, in a way, and challenging area where if we see something that is wrong and it's being said by an important scientist or by a politician or so on, we know the impact that can have. So we're there to try and challenge when necessary. We do a lot of work, obviously, that I can't talk about because it's confidential, but just this week, somebody reached out for help. It's absolutely classic. help, this is happening, we're being challenged, my organization is being challenged in some way, or homeopathy in my country is under threat, we've been asked for such and such information, can you help? And depending on the scenario, of course, they will need different types of data and so on. And we've become specialists in providing exactly the right data for those people at the right moment. So that's a lot of what we do. We think of it as firefighting, or someone says, okay, the bat signal's gone again. They need our help.
You know, that would be nice, wouldn't it? If you had a HRI bat sign, right? And it would shine at night, and you'd know that we need the dark nights, or the homeopathic nights, you know?
Thank you.
So I find that fascinating that the HRI is now at such a crucial junction that people can reach out and ask for help. And because you have mountains of data and clinical trials and research, as we've sort of mentioned, it's so interesting, isn't it, that people are able now then to literally to reach out and say, help, like you've just said, and you're able to support them. That's so important. And it's going to increase that request, I think, is going to increase because homeopathy is becoming more and more coming into the limelight once again.
Absolutely.
And I think this time it's here to stay. You know, it's not going to go anywhere.
And I think one of the most important things that HRI does is our homeopathic conferences that we do every 2 years normally. And we've done since 2013. Because they are one of those activities which I always think about when I have to do the annual report for donors and so on, that do everything in one package. That's why they're so important to us, because they are simultaneously fostering new research, giving a platform to the new studies to be presented by researchers all over the world, and also providing us with communications tools, because we then get films of these researchers to try to really introduce new audiences to research. So once every 2 years, it's this huge effort. It takes us 18 months to prepare each one. We have a bit of a 6-month breather between. But if you look back to the last one we did in June last year in London, it's put HRI London 2023, and you'll find it. It was typical, which was nice after the pandemic. We weren't sure how it would work after the pandemic. And it was exactly back to normal in the best possible way, meaning we had people from 30 countries. That's our typical audience stroke speaker selection. Speakers are usually somewhere between 18 and 30 countries at each conference. So, and then we bring a whole mixture of researchers. So we've got lab-based researchers, clinical researchers, vets, doctors, and so on, and we bring them all together. So you have this amazing melting pot. So we'd have a keynote speaker like Antonio Carvalho from Mexico presenting his work in fish farms. I mean, this is a huge new area. It's amazing. So he was able to show that normal homeopathic medicines that we think of, like silica and phosphorus and that kind of remedy, was able to improve the health of oysters and scallops and red snapper in fish farms, where they tend to get sick, which means fewer antibiotics, fewer antiparasitic drugs, etc., in the food chain, better animal welfare, all this stuff. So he's talking about that. And then we have another presenter from Brazil called Leo, who presented his PhD with strawberry crops in a greenhouse, testing homeopathy against placebo and getting results where the strawberry crops were better, more resistant to disease. We get them talking, and then somebody pipes up to say, you do realize the same remedies are used in humans for exactly the same kind of things, like silica. It makes you more robust to disease. So you get these conversations going on between people coming at this from completely different angles and finding these areas of crossover, triggering ideas in each other. One professor from Bulgaria, he was talking to me afterwards and saying, what I love about these events, Rachel, he's come multiple times, is you always get advice how to make your experiments better from someone who's done it a slightly different way. You go back inspired and you go back full of new ideas. And then people come back 2 years later to, check in again, where have they got, what's going on. So those conferences, for me, are really part of sort of the backbone of what HRI is all about.
It's amazing, isn't it, that this research brings so much to life, isn't it? And it's so exciting. What you've just mentioned is amazing. And I know that they're actually testing now, I'm sure you know about this with Nigel Hargreaves, about, the climate and how homeopathy can help there. And it's never ending. I mean, it's just phenomenal, as far as homeopathy is concerned. The applicability is incredibly vast and wide. I would probably say it's pretty much all encompassing,
It's almost one of the problems. You know, when people say, well, if you've got all this evidence, what's the problem? Classic example is with clinical research, where depending on how you define what is worthwhile, you've got anything from 270 right up to around 650 randomized controlled trials, right? Actually, that's including non-randomized. So it's more like top end 450, I should say, for randomized controlled trials. So sounds like loads, right? Why do we need more? Isn't it enough? The issue is it's too scattered. And it's because homeopathy can do so much. It's good for so many things. The researchers are all over the place doing trials on everything. So if you look at that data set, unfortunately, we only have an average of 2 to 3 trials per medical condition. That's the problem. And in this era of evidence-based medicine, as you like to call it, you know, for clinical guidelines and so on, people are used to asking for and seeing the same trial done several times in almost exactly the same way, with the big bucks behind it that pharmaceutical companies have, you know. Our evidence base is so scattered that unfortunately we're falling down still on this kind of way of presenting our data. So that's why also HRI have been calling for some years, saying, can we all start to focus a little bit more on certain areas and just build those evidence bases? There several areas we'd say we have promising evidence, emerging evidence. You know, there is data there. The trends are clear. It's definitely looking positive. We just want to build it to the point where it's more externally accepted by people sort of outside our world. So yeah, great that it can do so much, but could we not do the research on all of it? Could we focus?
And it's such a big pot, isn't it?
Yeah.
That research. How does that work? How is that working now with what you've said and, you know, getting more trials in specific areas and the collaboration that goes on internationally with HRI? Is that something you foresee over the next sort of several years coming together?
Absolutely. So one of the lovely things about how HRI has developed over just over a decade is that it means that our networks have grown with that, and relationships with the researchers in Brazil, with India, in Switzerland, in America, in Canada, and Australia, and so on. And that is what you really need before you can make real change. You need to be connected. And I think if you asked any of the people I'm referring to indirectly, we'd all say the same thing, is that we're all seeing the benefits of joining forces and discussing and collaborating. And Professor Leone Bonomin in Brazil needs a particular shout out, because she was a keynote speaker years ago at our conferences. And she knew at one point I was, you know, being asked by some donors about our conferences, and, you know, they're so expensive and there's so much work and it's such a commitment, and perhaps should we do something else? And I was like, no, they're important. And I said this to Leone, and she said, what? Anyone was questioning your conferences? No way. He said, if it wasn't for your conferences, I would never have met Stephen Cartwright. She's now doing studies with Stephen Cartwright. He's in the UK, she's in Brazil. And I've heard this over and over from key researchers around the world saying they came together through that system. So now there are more and more active collaborations, but it's not just that, it's that we're talking. Is that we're sharing our own ideas and saying, actually, we've already looked at that, don't bother, that's not a good way to do it, or have you thought of this, and so on. And that synergy, that's when you can actually accelerate.
That's so wonderful to know. Hey, I just had a thought as you were saying that. HRI Global Alliance.
Ooh.
Hey.
Ooh, shiny.
I don't know if it's worth
shiny,
I don't know if
like
it's
them.
worth anything, but hey,
like
I can just see that in lights, you know.
Thank you.
Welcome to the HRI Global Alliance. So everybody joins, everybody collaborates.
Although I am now thinking slightly Star Trek-y as well.
Yeah.
It has a feel of that. I'm a bit of a sci-fi fan.
Beam me up. Hey, Star Wars or Star Trek then?
Both. No, I'm not like a Trekkie or anything, but, you know, a Saturday morning when I don't want to think too much, I do love The Mandalorian and things like that.
Okay, Star Trek. Kirk or Picard?
Oh, Picard.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
The new series, right?
The Gravitas. Yeah.
The new one that's come out, the three.
About
that's
Picard.
Just amazing. You know when they all got together?
Exactly. It's fair. And of course, this I love how there's this shift in TV of acknowledging older actors and using older actors, and not everybody has to be 25. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see William Shatner come back, you know, somehow.
Yes. That would be great.
Even if he's just sitting in a chair nonstop, you know, because he's about 90 plus, isn't he?
Yeah.
But hey, and okay, it's totally off tangent, but Star Wars. Which character?
Oh my gosh.
It's got to be Vader for me.
Really?
But in a nice way, because he changes eventually. He changes. He just needed some arnica, didn't he? That's all it was.
I take your point. I take your point. Well, it has to be said, of course, there are moments in my job where I do get furious, right? Some of the attacks that happen are so devious and so clever and so awful that it does bring out a different side of me, which Chris Connolly once referred to as Darth Roberts.
I'm going to put that in the script.
You're in Darth Roberts mode because I was so angry, and it's like, right. And it's like, boom, 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 right. I've got to take this down. And that fury, if I could channel that fury into my writing and just go, no, 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 no. It does happen occasionally. And I think the day he said that, I was wearing a black shirt.
Oh.
And he just went, like, I think I might leave.
Did you have a bicycle helmet on as well? Because that would have been it. That's a whole new level.
Exactly. So yes, there are the odd days where I do go into that mode a little bit.
I think with the podcast that I'm doing, and I'm sure it's like this with other podcast hosts as well, or I hope it isn't, but I've had a few encounters, and people just it's just odd, isn't it? Because people just think you're very stupid, and you think, well, if only you knew how much is in the background,
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
You just have to open your eyes, don't you?
Yeah. And I think he said people's eyes are being opened. I mean, one of the things that we deliberately didn't talk about for many years at HRI was, if you like, the weaknesses of the evidence base for conventional medicine, right? Because it's not about that to us at all. And certainly wouldn't want to be seen to be attacking conventional medicine in any way, because that's not what we're about. But I was interested to see a shift in what's being talked about openly now by scientists and somewhat by journalists as well. So I don't know if you saw in The Conversation, not that long ago, they were talking about, the headline was, we don't know whether most medical treatments work, and we know even less about whether they cause harm. That was in June 2022. And it was talking about a new study that had found that 95% of conventional medical treatments do not have a high quality evidence base behind them to support them, to tell us whether they work. It's 95% of
That's huge, isn't it?
Now, that was not actually a surprise to me, only because it's my job to know these kind of things.
Yeah.
But to see it published in a scientific peer-reviewed paper and talked about in the media to some extent, I was like, okay, this is good, because I think the public just need to be aware that there's a myth, I think, that lots of people think conventional medicine is tried and tested and proven, and we know exactly what it will do. And, alternative stroke, CAM stroke, integrative, whatever you want to call anything else, isn't. You don't know whether it works. It's not regulated. It's not tested. And it's a total myth. The reality is, like most things, boringly grayer, mixed between the two. This evidence-based medicine thing, I think, has gone a little bit too far in the sense that it's not as simple as that. Those 95% of conventional treatments, I'm sure most of them work. It's just, all they're saying is, we haven't got exact data to tell us what it does and doesn't do, and that's okay to me. If people say you haven't got enough data, or it's not high quality enough, it's not whatever is lacking, it only puts us in the same group as 95% of conventional medicine. It's normal to be like this. This is, a pretty normal evidence base in that sense. So I'm just always looking for that slightly more level playing field, if you like.
I certainly think I've coined this term 2024, the year of homeopathy. I think with the work that HRI is doing, with the with other things that are going on around the world, as far as homeopathy, from research to new discoveries, new remedies, etc., etc. I think we're just in the moment. I just feel it, and everyone I'm speaking to shares the same feelings, that this is the time for homeopathy, where we can really raise that flag and educate people and get them to look at homeopathy as a serious, not as an alternative, but as another system that is available to them to use. I've never liked that word alternative,
No, I just think of it as another toolbox. It's like, if you're ill, I feel very, very lucky that I came across it relatively young. So for my whole life, I've had the best of conventional medicine, I've had the best of homeopathy, and it's just two toolkits. And given the scenario in front of me, I can choose which to try first. And if one doesn't work, use the other. That's just how I see it.
This is a wonderful way of putting it, actually. I have a question for you. What is in the pipeline for the remainder of 24? I know we're still in, early days, but
Absolutely.
What's on the horizon as such, and what are you working on?
So the next thing right in front of me is we are this close to finalizing the venue for our next big conference, which will be June 2025. A lot of our work is we've recruited 2 new junior researchers. So we're just expanding.
Wonderful.
Which is really, really nice because can just never keep up with demand. So we're busy training them up on the specific evidence base and putting them to good use, scoping new projects and helping to get a couple of new projects off the ground. So again, can't go public on them yet, but we have some interesting studies in the pipeline. One particular area where we want to focus, and we want to basically just start doing a little bit more of the research, not doing it ourselves, but coming up with the protocol ourselves, picking the team ourselves, funding it ourselves where we can, seeking support, additional funding from other people to support our seed funding and so on. So we're kind of driving it forward a little bit more ourselves. We've also got a systematic review of acute otitis media that Dr. Esther van der Werf did for us. She's one of our latest recruits a couple of years ago. She's a fabulous clinical researcher with a great career in complementary medicine. And that's just been submitted for publication. And that was done in conjunction with the University of Bristol. So this was just, very ordinary research in a way that's sort of boring, but to me, that's exactly what we should be doing. It's what you do in conventional medicine. We have all these little trials on ear infections in children. So you need to do a proper systematic review, go through them, see what's good, see what's not, see what should happen next. And that's what we've just done. So that hopefully will be published soon.
It's all very exciting, and you are absolutely the best person for this as well.
Oh, thank you.
I think you're absolutely so inspiring, Rachel, honestly. And I was saying this to you offline as well. You are, we were talking about Hollywood, weren't we, and celebrities. And, for me, the world of homeopathy and everyone that comes on the podcast is my celebrity. And you're obviously one of them. So send me your autograph, please.
It's very kind of you.
It's been an absolute delight to have you on to share your insights and experiences. And I hope that we can talk again very soon. But in the meantime, I'm really grateful to you. And thank you so very much.
Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
I do hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the Homeopathy Health Show. Please do support the show by clicking follow on my socials. Remember, the more exposure the podcast receives, the better for homeopathy around the world. You can find me on Instagram by searching for @like_treatslike, and on both Facebook and TikTok by searching for @like_treatslike. So let's promote the voice of homeopathy on radio and podcast around the world together. Don't forget to visit me online at www.liketreatslike.co.uk and click on the radio and podcast tab. Here you'll be able to see all the guests that have joined me on the show so far. And of course, you can stream on demand the latest episode to your mobile, tablet or PC. Until next time, stay safe and take care.